Hello everyone and welcome to the Vortex, where lies and falsehoods are trapped and exposed. I'm Michael Voris. It's really only talked about in hushed tones these days because of fear or worry over being labeled chauvinist or whatever, but no matter how you slice it up, Christianity in general and Catholicism specifically have been reduced to a faith which appeals much more to the feminine. The masculine is pretty much outright rejected or told to be subject to the feminine, and this has had a devastating effect on the faith. Of course, we see this same cultural occurrence as well. Everywhere, the societal norm is that men, or more specifically, the masculine, is denigrated. Men are made to appear as weak or buffoons in everything from TV commercials, where the smarter, hipper, more with it woman almost always bests the man, to TV programs where the male is often just a nice, lovable dunce who has an engaging smile, and that's about all. Men have been robbed of their masculinity, and with that theft, the entire notion of masculinity and all that comes with it has been reduced to little else than a video game where young boys shoot and kill zombies or whatever. It's fair at this point to ask, what is masculinity? First off, maleness and masculinity are not the same thing. Being an adult male is simply not enough. One must be a man. Being a man is a choice to live a certain way. It comes from the will. Maleness is biological, a physical quality. Masculinity is a spiritual and cultural quality that does have some connection to the biology of being male, but there is more to it. A male must be brought into, taught, initiated into the life of masculinity. This being brought into masculinity, from moving from a boy to a man, is a current which flows through vast amounts of Western as well as world literature, from Homer and Hamlet to Hemingway to F. Scott Fitzgerald. In fact, much of the plots and narratives of the most famous stories we have as a culture revolve around the successful or failed attempts of young males striving to become men. So what is masculinity? The first thing to express is from the realm of the biological. The female is the norm, the baseline, the standard. It is from the female that the male must biologically be differentiated. Science has concluded and proven that in the womb, the small embryo will develop into a female naturally unless certain chemical baths wash over the developing human being. So the male comes about only through a positive action. This biology has far-reaching effects in the infant and young boy. Unlike the young toddler girl, who only needs to differentiate herself as merely separate from mother, the young boy must differentiate himself not as just separate, but also of a different kind altogether. Hence, the male has to, quote, leave the feminine and go in search of what he actually is. He needs to be taught and learn what it is to be masculine. As an aside, history may well record this signal fact as the overriding condemnation of our age, that when young males turned to find out who they were, there were no masculine men or authentic fathers to teach them or from which to learn. Growing into manhood, the rite of initiation has been a staple of every civilization right back to the beginning of recorded history. In more tribal times, boys were actively taken from the protective embrace of the feminine and led by the village men into various rites, almost always involving hardship, danger, and bloodshed, from which they emerged as men. They then returned to the community which the feminine had gathered together and protected it. This then becomes the defining understanding of the masculine, that the feminine, the community, must be taken leave of, and hardships must be borne so that the man may become masculine and now go back to the feminine, not to be protected by it, but indeed to protect it. If you think about this, this is precisely what the second person of the Blessed Trinity did. The people of God, Israel, were like a bride to God. It was the feminine. God indeed often spoke of the collective people as his spouse. The second person departs from the feminine in a manner of speaking and moves from infant male to manhood through blood and suffering, through sacrifice, in other words, and then returns to the feminine as protector, to his bride, the church. Our blessed Lord then becomes the example of masculinity par excellence. He is the perfect male, willing to depart from the community so that he may return to it as protector and provider. What defines the masculine, therefore, is, in a phrase, the willingness to sacrifice for the other. It is in this way that we can say God is masculine, not male, but masculine. But what happens to our understanding of God if our understanding of masculinity is abolished or swamped over by an emphasis, an overemphasis on the feminine? Within the church herself, much disaster arises. In liturgy, the Mass, for example, the notion of sacrifice, the masculine, is overcome by the feminine, which is much more oriented to the community. The emphasis has shifted from the altar to the people, and we have seen this in parish after parish all over the Western world. Women run everything and men leave, from altar girls to lectors to every kind of ministry there is in the church. In a 1987 University of Notre Dame study of Catholic parish life since Vatican II, the following facts emerged. 85% of those involved in social justice work and tending to the poor and sick are women. 80% of those involved in CCD and RCIA work were women. 80% of prayer groups are women. 75% of Bible study religious discussion groups are women. 60% of the time, youth groups are headed up by women. In country after country in the West and culture after culture, poll after poll suggests that men view being outwardly religious or spiritual as feminine. This has robbed the faith of one of its most foundational and vivifying truths, that the faith is ultimately about sacrifice for the sake of the community, the willingness to shed blood if necessary. This notion appeals to men at their core. We are hardwired for it, and when it is absent from the daily life of the church, men sense they have nothing to identify with, and they leave. Tomorrow, more on men, masculinity, and the faith. God love you. I'm Michael Voris.